What if one morning changed the world forever? A sky so blue, a city so enlivened in a moment, silence turned into sirens, and peace into panic. September 11th, 2001, was not just a day of loss, it was the beginning of a war that would stretch across continents, decades, and generations. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the United States faced an unprecedented act of terrorism that would shape the global landscape for decades. 4 commercial airplanes were hijacked by 19 militants associated with the extremist group Al-Qaeda. These individuals had trained for months to carry out a highly coordinated attack against key American targets. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Just 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower, creating a second fiery explosion and confirming the event as a deliberate act of terror. Both towers eventually collapsed, sending clouds of dust and debris into the streets and causing immense panic. Meanwhile, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. A fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was also hijacked, but never reached its intended target. Believed to be either the White House or the U.S. Capitol, brave passengers on board fought the hijackers, leading to the plane's crash in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and injured thousands more. Victims included passengers, first responders, office workers, and ordinary citizens. The events were broadcast live, witnessed in real time by millions across the globe. The psychological shock and grief were immediate and widespread. Beyond the physical destruction, the attacks exposed vulnerabilities in national security and ignited a wave of fear, sorrow, and anger throughout the country. It was clear that the attacks were not just crimes, but acts of war, signaling a new era of global conflict. This tragic event would become the catalyst for the war on terror, reshaping military strategies and international alliances for years to come. In the hours and days following the 9/11 attacks, the United States responded with urgency and resolve. President George W. Bush addressed the nation, declaring the acts not only as crimes, but as acts of war. The emotional weight of the tragedy unified the country, and there was a strong national call for justice and prevention of future attacks. The U.S. government swiftly launched the War on Terror, a broad and long-term global military campaign aimed at eliminating terrorist organizations and their support networks. This campaign would involve diplomacy, intelligence operations, law enforcement measures, economic sanctions, and, most notably, military action. On September 14, 2001, Congress passed the Authorization for Use of Military Force, AUMF, giving the President broad powers to use all necessary and appropriate force against those deemed responsible for the attacks. The intelligence community, led by the CIA and FBI, began identifying and tracking Al-Qaeda operatives and their connections around the world. Within weeks, it became clear that Al-Qaeda's leadership was based in Afghanistan, protected by the Taliban regime. This intelligence shaped the immediate focus of the war on terror. Domestically, the U.S. established the Department of Homeland Security to coordinate national efforts against terrorism and passed the USA Patriot Act to expand surveillance and law enforcement powers. Airports, federal buildings, and other critical infrastructures increased their security protocols. Internationally, the U.S. sought support from allies, receiving widespread sympathy and cooperation. NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history, treating the attack as one against all member nations. Governments around the world pledged resources and intelligence to support the mission. The war on terror would soon extend beyond Afghanistan, influencing American foreign and domestic policy for decades, and marking the start of a new era in global security strategy. In response to the 9/11 attacks, and after confirming that Al-Qaeda was operating from safe havens within Afghanistan under the protection of the Taliban, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom on October 7, 2001, This marked the beginning of the invasion of Afghanistan. The military campaign was supported by airstrikes, special operations forces, and cooperation with anti-Taliban groups inside Afghanistan, most notably the Northern Alliance. The main goals of the invasion were to dismantle Al-Qaeda's terrorist network, remove the Taliban from power, and prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for future attacks. American and coalition forces moved quickly, targeting Taliban strongholds, training camps, and key infrastructure. The US utilized precision bombing and intelligence-driven raids to disrupt enemy operations. By mid-November, major cities like Kabul and Kandahar had fallen, and the Taliban regime collapsed. Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, managed to escape during the Battle of Tora Bora in December 2001, retreating into the mountainous region along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. As the Taliban government fell, the US and its allies began efforts to stabilize Afghanistan, supporting the formation of a new interim government, led by Hamid. The focus expanded beyond military objectives to include nation-building, reconstructing institutions, promoting democracy, and improving infrastructure and public services. However, despite early successes, many Taliban fighters regrouped in remote areas and across the border in Pakistan, launching an insurgency that would persist for years. The invasion of Afghanistan marked the first direct military action in the broader war on terror. It received widespread international support and was seen initially as a justified response to the 9/11 attacks. The complexity of Afghanistan's internal politics, tribal dynamics, and geography would soon reveal the difficulty of achieving long-term peace and stability in the region. Following the 9/11 attacks, global military involvement quickly escalated as countries around the world recognized the threat posed by international terrorism. In a historic move, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO invoked Article 5 of its founding charter on September 12, 2001, declaring that an attack on one member state was an attack on all. This was the first and only time Article 5 was activated in NATO's history, reflecting the magnitude of the crisis and the solidarity among member nations. As a result, NATO allies pledged military, logistical, and intelligence support to the United States. In its efforts to dismantle Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, several nations, including the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, and France, committed troops, aircraft, and resources to the US-led coalition. These forces joined Operation Enduring Freedom and later became part of the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, a NATO-led mission established by the United Nations to help maintain security and assist in rebuilding Afghanistan. Troops were deployed across the country, engaging in combat operations, training Afghan security forces, and aiding reconstruction efforts. Each participating country took on different roles based on its capabilities, with some focusing on combat, while others provided humanitarian aid, medical assistance, or development projects. The collective effort demonstrated a unified global stance against terrorism, but it also exposed challenges related to coordination, strategy, and cultural differences among allies. Over time, more than 40 countries contributed to military operations in Afghanistan, making it one of the most internationally supported military campaigns in history. The global military involvement also led to broader changes in security policies, intelligence sharing, and counter-terrorism laws across the world. Nations not directly involved militarily still supported the war through diplomatic backing, financial aid, or participation in counter-terrorism partnerships aligned with the objectives of the war on terror. After the initial success of toppling the Taliban regime in 2001, the focus of the international coalition in Afghanistan shifted toward long-term conflict management and nation-building. The idea was not just to eliminate terrorist threats, but to create a stable, democratic, and self-sufficient Afghan state that could prevent extremism from re-emerging. This mission proved far more difficult than anticipated. While a new Afghan government was formed under President Hamid Karzai, It faced internal corruption, weak institutions, and constant insurgent threats. The Taliban, though removed from power, quickly regrouped and began launching guerrilla-style attacks, especially in rural areas, creating an environment of constant insecurity. NATO and US forces, alongside Afghan troops, found themselves engaged in a prolonged counterinsurgency war that stretched for nearly 2 decades. Troop levels fluctuated over the years, reaching a peak with the US military surge in 2009 under President Barack Obama, when over 100,000 US troops were deployed. The strategy aimed to weaken the Taliban, protect population centers, and give space for political and social development. Billions of dollars were invested in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and the training of Afghan police and military forces. Elections were held. Schools were opened especially for girls, and access to technology and media increased. However, progress was uneven and often reversed by waves of violence. Tribal loyalties, warlord politics, and the rugged geography made governance difficult. Corruption within the Afghan government and dependency on foreign aid further hindered sustainable development. Efforts to negotiate peace with the Taliban repeatedly faltered, and civilian casualties continued to rise. Many Afghans faced daily uncertainty, caught between the promises of modernization and the realities of war. The prolonged conflict drained resources, tested public support in contributing nations, and highlighted the limitations of using military power alone to achieve lasting peace and political transformation in complex societies. In 2021, nearly 2 decades after the initial invasion, the United States and NATO allies completed their military withdrawal from Afghanistan. The decision followed a peace agreement signed in 2020 between the US and the Taliban under the Trump administration, which set a timeline for troop withdrawal. The Biden administration upheld the agreement, announcing that all US forces would leave by September 11, 2021, later accelerating the timeline to August. As foreign troops began departing, the Taliban launched a swift and aggressive military campaign across the country. In just a few months, district after district fell, often with little resistance from Afghan forces who were underpaid, demoralized, and in many cases, abandoned by their leadership. By mid-August, the Taliban had reached the capital, Kabul. The Afghan president fled the country, and government institutions collapsed almost overnight. The fall of Kabul on August 15, 2021, marked the end of the US-backed government and the return of Taliban rule. Images of desperate Afghans flooding the airport, clinging to planes, and pleading for evacuation circulated worldwide, sparking outrage, sorrow, and debate over the handling of the exit. Thousands of foreign nationals and Afghan allies were evacuated in a chaotic airlift operation led by US and allied forces. The withdrawal prompted intense criticism from multiple sides, with concerns over the humanitarian crisis, the future of Afghan women and minorities, and the credibility of Western commitments. For many Afghans, hopes for a democratic and open society were abruptly shattered. Meanwhile, global observers questioned whether the 2-decade-long war had achieved its objectives. The Taliban's return to power raised fears of renewed extremism, repression, and regional instability. The end of military involvement did not mark the end of the conflict's legacy, as the consequences of the war, both in Afghanistan and internationally, continue to unfold and shape political and security debates. The story of the 9/11's military attack war is one of deep tragedy, global response, and complex consequences. What began as a moment of unimaginable terror led to years of conflict, sacrifice, and attempts to reshape a distant nation. From the ashes of the Twin Towers rose a worldwide movement to combat terrorism, unite allies, and defend values of freedom and security. Yet, despite immense efforts, the road to peace proved far harder than the path to war. The long years in Afghanistan showed both the strength of human determination and the limits of military power. As we reflect on this chapter of history, we are reminded that behind every strategy are human lives, and behind every policy are communities seeking peace. Understanding this history helps us not just remember what happened, but learn how to build a future where such suffering never has to be repeated.